Good evening. Welcome to the October 1st, 2018 meeting of the Stillwater City Council. I will call this meeting to order, and I'm going to ask Timber Essery to come join us and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Timber. Timber's here as part of, I think, Fire Prevention Week, correct? You have a connection to the fire department, right? That's great. I will move to our proclamation on Fire Prevention Week in just a second. I'm going to start out with Public Power. We have a proclamation for Public Power Week. Lauren, do you want to come up, or I'm going to read it from up here, and then I guess I'll come down and shake your hand. All right. Whereas we, the citizens of Stillwater, place a high value on local control over community services, and therefore have chosen to operate a community-owned electric utility, and as customers and owners of our electric utility have a direct say in utility operations and policies. And whereas Stillwater Electric Utility provides our homes, businesses, social service, and law enforcement agencies with reliable, efficient, and cost-effective electricity, employing sound business practices designed to ensure the best possible service at competitive rates. And whereas Stillwater Electric Utility is a valuable community asset that contributes to the well-being of local citizens through financial support of the general government. And whereas Stillwater Electric Utility is a dependable and trustworthy institution whose local operation provides many consumer protections and continues to make our community a better place to live and work, and contributes to protecting the global environment. Now therefore be it resolved that Stillwater Electric Utility will continue to work to bring low-cost, safe, reliable electricity to community homes and businesses just as it has since 1901, the year when the utility was created to serve all the citizens of Stillwater. And be it further resolved that the week of October 7th through 13th be designated Public Power Week to recognize Stillwater Electric Utility for its contributions to the community and to educate customer owners, policymakers, and employees on the benefits of public power. And be it further resolved that our community joins hands with more than 2,000 other public power systems in the United States in this celebration of public power, which is best for consumers, business, the community, and the nation. In witness whereof I have unto set my hand and cause this to be affixed the Great Seal of the City of Stillwater this first day of October 2018.
Thank you very much. One of the greatest benefits of public power is local control, and we see that with all the great decisions that you all have made. So thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to Fire Prevention Week. Do we have a special guest here for Fire Prevention Week? I think we might.
I believe I see him coming in, Mayor.
All right, we're going to give him a second.
He's a tall fella.
Welcome. Is this Sparky? Is that his name? Sparky. This is Sparky. Welcome to the City Council meeting, Sparky. All right. Whereas the City of Stillwater, Oklahoma is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting Stillwater, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern both locally and nationally, and homes are the locations where people are at the greatest risk from fire, and whereas home fires killed 2,735 people in the United States in 2016, according to the National Fire Protection Association, and fire departments in the United States responded to 352,000 home fires. And whereas the majority of U.S. fire deaths, 4 out of 5, occur at home each year, and the fire death rate per 1,000 home fires reported in U.S. fire departments was 10% higher in 2016 than in 1980. And whereas Stillwater's residents should identify places in their home where fires can start and eliminate those hazards. And whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires in half, and Stillwater residents should install smoke alarms in every sleeping room, outside each separate sleeping area, and on every level of the home. And whereas Stillwater's residents should listen for the sound of the smoke alarm, and when it sounds, respond by going outside immediately to the designated meeting place. Whereas Stillwater's residents who have planned and practiced a home fire escape plan are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive a fire. And whereas Stillwater's first responders are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and protection education. And whereas Stillwater's residents are responsive to public education measures and are able to take action to increase their safety from fire, especially in their homes. And whereas the 2018 Fire Protection Week theme of Look, Listen, Learn, Be Aware, Fire Can Happen Anywhere effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our safety from fire. Therefore, I, William Joyce, Mayor of the City of Stillwater, do hereby proclaim October 7th through 13th, 2018, as Fire Prevention Week throughout this city, and I urge all the people of Stillwater to be aware of their surroundings, look for available ways out in the event of a fire or other emergency, respond when the smoke alarm sounds by exiting the building immediately, and to support the many public safety activities and efforts of Stillwater Fire and Emergency Services during Fire Prevention Week 2018. Thank you all for your service. All right, that takes us to item 4 on the consent docket. Counselors, are there questions, comments, or motions regarding the consent docket?
Motion to approve the consent docket.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, the consent docket is approved. All right, item 5, public comment on agenda items not scheduled for public hearing. I do have one person signed up, I think. Is he here? Roger? Roger goes?
Just came in.
There he is. Please state your name and address for the record. You have 3 minutes to let us know what you think.
Roger Gose, 1120 East Connell. Just here to speak in support of the report on the transportation capital projects. I'm glad that found some money, and hopefully you all will support getting some transportation projects that are badly needed on the way. On that one, I would like to ask that on the multimodal portion on Husband, maybe that have some public input. I don't, maybe I was asleep at the wheel for a while, but what that proposal is along Husband from Boomer Road to 3rd Street's pretty significant. I hope there's some more discussion of that before that's approved. Sounds like the bridges and things are really needed and plans are ready, so time to get going on that. And then on the stormwater capital projects, there's nowhere near enough money to do those things, as you know, but part of it is a master drainage plan, Stillwater, the capital project, a Stillwater master drainage plan, and I've talked to staff today. In 1999, the city contracted with Dewberry Davis for a master drainage plan. That contract ran through November of 2000. It was the last contract. 2002 was the last amendment. It was over $1 million of work, and we're having trouble finding anything. So if we're going to contract for this, let's get it done and get the report on the shelf and then start using it. Part of that was a digital train model of the city, which was aerial topography, and hopefully that's still around here, and that may have even been updated in the early 2010s. But there's a lot of the things that I saw in the Dewberry contract that if we could find them, should be able to be plugged into this study. So I hope some more research is done on that. Just want to offer support. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Okay, I don't have anybody else signed up for speaking at this point, right? Okay, that takes us to item 7, public hearings. And item A, I think we have a memo to postpone this item. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? We need a motion and a vote to postpone this item to October 15.
Motion to postpone this item, map amendment for 1504 West 8th to October 15th, 2018.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to postpone item A to October 15. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, the item is postponed. All right. Now the fun stuff. Item A, general orders. A, status of organization-wide cash balances with recommendations for utilization and overview of fund reserve calculations. Mr. McNichol.
Well, there will be a host of people presenting to you tonight. I gave you a brief rundown last week, I believe. Melissa Reams will be presenting, our Deputy City Manager, CFO, will be presenting most of the information with support from Christy Cluck in Finance and Zach Henson from Stormwater and Monty Carnes from Transportation, and I might chime in a time or two. So I'll turn it over to Deputy City Manager Melissa Reams.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. As you can tell from my report, we have, and I'm going to, sorry. I think it's been presented that we have found money, and I want to correct that right out of the gate. The money was never lost. We've always known where it was, but it never got deployed. It's been sitting, waiting to be used for its intended purpose. And there's several of funds that are this way. So City Manager McNichol and I started looking at the different funds, at their cash balances and what were their uses and how could we utilize these in the future to get the projects done that the citizens are asking to be completed and the money was intended to complete. So we went back to the strategic plan, and one of the strategic priorities is effective services and accountable government, and objective 1.2 is to continue to align revenues and expenditures while maintaining appropriate reserve levels. And that's exactly what we're going to do over the next few months with you. This isn't going to be a one and done thing. It's going to take time and planning and some research on our part to make sure that we get set up to be effective into the future. And not just into the near future, but into a long-term future, say 5 years out. So that's kind of the background of what got us going on this. I tend to look at things from a strategic viewpoint, and I started that with the cash balances. Our year ends June 30, and it ended June 30, 2018, but we have yet to collect into July and August revenue that really belong to 2018. So we used that philosophy of what would our cash have looked like if all the bills had been paid as of June 30 and all the revenue had been collected as of June 30, 2018. And it was very interesting what we found. We had a budget to actual positive variance. And what that means is that our employees were very conservative with their spending, so even though we had budgeted a certain amount, they did not spend all of that. And our revenues could have come in greater than what we had forecasted. So when you get those two positive things going, that means you have more cash in your fund at the end of the year than you anticipated. And that gives us a good problem in the general fund to contemplate this evening is what do we do with that money and where do we deploy that money? The first recommendation that I have here in my report is to take that $2.8 million of positive budget to actual variance and let's allot that back to transportation. And Monty Carnes, our Director of Transportation, is going to come here in a few minutes and give you some ideas about what projects we could utilize that money for. Then we started looking at salaries of our employees, and our employees have not had some of our general employees have not had an increase in several years. And so while we have done everything we could to kind of mitigate that, and the biggest thing that we've been able to do over the last 3 years is keep the insurance premiums fixed. We have not had to increase those. So while we weren't able to give them more money, we haven't taken anything from them either. We were like to bring to you a proposal to give them a 4% increase to their pay. And Human Resources Director Christy Looper is here. If you've got specific questions about that, she'll be able to answer those for you. We'd also like to go out for a request for a proposal on a stormwater rate study. In digging back through the records, the Stormwater Fund was created in 1997, and I think I attached those documents for your perusal. The rates have not been adjusted since 1997. You and I, as a residential utility customer, pay $1 per month for stormwater. The commercial rates are capped at $55, and it's based on, I think, how many acres you have in your facility. So we'd like to do a rate study on that and come back to you after that's completed with a proposal for increased stormwater fees. And then lastly, out of the general fund, Finance Director Cluck and I, and with Mr. McNichol's help, are going to sit down and come up with a reserve policy that is logical and defendable and makes sense in the world that we live today. We all know that we need savings because we have things that happen to us that we can't anticipate, but we also need to consider how much is enough, how much is too much, and what are the parameters under which that money would be deployed or used. So that's not an immediate question. That's something that we're going to need to do some research on and come back to you at a future meeting with our recommendations in that area. So with all, it's kind of setting the groundwork for that. Mr. McNichol, do you have some comments?
I do, and you probably have questions for Melissa, but I want to remind people that in the meeting of the 24th, we talked about the fact that in November of 15, we were $1.8 million underwater. One of the other things that we have done is cut, just as a recap of what was presented last week, it's cut well over 80 positions, employment positions. That's saved money. We froze those positions and to this day, look at every position that we anticipate refilling. One of the things that we recently did was we brought to you a proposal for a welder to save money in waste management, and found out after the fact that not only did we have people on board that could do that we could transfer, that we also had the equipment to be able to fix those items, so that cost was significantly reduced. So we are always challenging our folks to save money. They have done that over the last 2.5, 3 years, and part of what we're talking about tonight is a result of their hard work at reducing expenses.
Absolutely. So do you have any just general questions that I can answer for you now? I'd like to, if not, then we can proceed with Director Carnes's presentation on transportation and stormwater.
I think I just want to make sure I clarify that the funds that are available to be utilized, we're going to now go through and figure out where that money needs to go in each of these areas.
Yes.
There will be a...
And it may be that you can act on some of these tonight. City Attorney McGrath and I visited this afternoon, and we kind of feel like you might want to digest the information that you hear, and we could come back to you at the next meeting, the October 15th meeting, with resolutions. That helps us a lot as we're going back through, not having to dig through minutes of meetings to see what was approved. If it's in resolution form, it's a little easier to search for, and I just think it gives it that little bit of a little more credibility that it was approved. So yes, that's the plan.
And I would echo Melissa's request for a resolution, because there was one fund that was set up in 2011 that we have not been able to go back and historically piece together. We know where the money came from, but we don't know why it was created. Don't have a clue, and still don't. So a resolution in doing that could be quite helpful to somebody in the future.
Right.
Councilors, further questions at this point? Melissa, I might just ask for a broad overview of the money again. Like you said, 2.8 from this year's
General fund.
general positive variance.
Right.
Right, but we've got certain other buckets of money that we're talking about here. Can
We
you kind of give
do.
us a big picture?
The procedure in the past, remember, we transfer every year money out of the SUA that's undesignated, that's available. That's what it's there for, to come over to the general fund and help us out. If we had these positive variances in the past, we've always moved it back to the SUA. I'm asking you to consider doing something a little different this year and leaving that money in the general fund to be deployed out for transportation projects. There are pots of money in the SUA that are set aside as reserves, and Finance Director Cluck and I and Christy will come, and she can give you some more, answer your questions a little bit better on those reserves. But they're set aside for electric. They're set aside for water and waste management. And the question becomes, what is a good level to have set aside? My projection, or currently for the electric reserve, the RSF, you've heard us talk about that, is about $25 million. So is that enough? Is that too much? What are our assumptions? How do we calculate that? We really want to go back and start peeling the onion and look at the layers and what makes up those layers. Certainly we want whichever group we're talking about to have the funds they need to do the projects that they have planned for the next 5 years. We want the maintenance to be kept up. That's why we collect this money, not to have it just sit in a fund somewhere. Waste management is another one, although it's a lot smaller. So it has had a fund balance building up, and you'll see that when we get to SUA. We're going to come to you with a proposal or a recommendation that we fund their reserve. They had a reserve set up with $1 million cap. I'd like to go ahead and fund that completely. And then with what's left there, not completely taking all the fund balance, but with what's left there, we're going to move that back to the general fund to be used for transportation projects. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Or-
one of my big picture questions just around this money is, especially in the SUA money, it's money that's been generated by earned revenue.
Correct.
Right? This is not
Correct.
part of the sales tax designation that goes to SUA. This is money
This
that's
is
been
rates.
built up.
Yeah,
rates,
electric rates, water rates, waste management rates.
and that we've set aside for various purposes over the years.
Right,
And now we're reallocating based on what our needs are right now.
correct. That's a good summation.
It's important to note that if you accepted all of our recommendations, that the 5-year plan in electric in particular can be completed, and there would still be, at the end of that time, a $6 million balance in that fund. That sounds like a lot of money, but as you well know from a few weeks ago, when we replaced some transformers, those things are very expensive, and we can have issues that in the multi-million dollars in a very short period of time with storm damage or something of that nature.
Reserve funds are a key component to financial health for any organization, even for you and I personally. You know, if you take it down to that level, that's why we have retirement savings. We have what I call long-term savings and disposable saving. I have all of mine, chopped up into these different little pots. But that's on a broader scale. That's what we're wanting to do with the organizations we're responsible for here at the city. But there again, the question comes, how much is enough? What is defendable? That's why over in the SUA, we're going to ask for some rate studies over there as well with the electric and the water and the wastewater. We just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, setting the benchmark, and being good stewards of the resources that are entrusted to us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Monty now to come up, and he's going to give you, I think he's going to start with stormwater and give you an overview of where we are in stormwater and kind of why we need the master plan.
Good evening. Monty Carnes, Director of Transportation and Stormwater. Let's close that one. I've got Zach with us here tonight. Zach is our manager of the MS4 and other drainage issues as well. He's doing a wonderful job with that. And let's see. There we go. So here to talk about our stormwater capital needs. Our possible projects are the master drainage plan like we talked about. Some projects we've kind of identified from input from citizens and our own observation, and these are in no particular order of priority, is the Duck Miller intersection, and then that extends on down to Main and Miller. 12th Avenue between Duncan to Duck, that's just south of the library. Orchard up to Walnut, up to University, there's a line in there that's we're starting to have some problems with. In the past, there's a project sitting ready, could be brushed up pretty quick, to improve the Duck Creek Channel north of 6th, all the way to the park there at Ridge and 3rd, and then on up to 3rd Street and around to Willis. And then a project in the southwest called Babcock Basin, that's already designed as well. So let's start with the master drainage plan. There's 3 components to that. We see reviewing the existing stormwater fees as part of what Melissa said, looking at the rate study. We also want to look at some hydrologic and hydraulic data on streams that have at least 40 acres drainage area to them. Part of that, we want to update our existing inventory of the storm sewer system. We have some idea of where storm sewers are. We don't have the sizes of them, or in some cases, the depth. And then as part of that, I want to talk about the drainage areas mainly outside of the city of Stillwater and why I think it's important for us to study those as well. Existing fees, I think as we've been reported, that's about $1 per month for a residential unit. I believe a residential unit is about 5,000 square feet. They're capped at $55 per month. That figures out to about, I think about 8 acres, maybe a little more than 8 acres when you do the math. So any commercial area that you see larger than 8, 9 acres is only paying $55 a month. Existing, or that money now is used to fund stormwater in my area, and primarily Zach's salary, and to enforce the MS4 and the things we need to support that. Paula gets a chunk of that to enforce floodplain and developmental review of drainage. Then operations gets a pretty good chunk to try and maintain drainage easements and systems, and it's not enough to support that need. Currently, our budgeted expenses exceed our revenue by about $105,000. We've got enough reserve to go about 2 more fiscal years after this year. That's provided we don't take any capital expenses from that account, and I'm going to ask you to do that here in a minute. So what would be our goals for stormwater fees? We want a reliable funding source to do our fixed costs that staff has. We need to determine what the proper level of maintenance will be for our stormwater system. That include all the drainage, easements, storm sewers, that type of things. and then determine what capital improvements need to be funded and source of funding for those, and how much we can reasonably generate or expect to generate to fund that. For the hydrologic and hydraulic data, again, we'd update up 40-acre streams, inventory the existing system. Roger mentioned the Dewberry Design Group study. We have portions of that study. We've identified letters going back to 2007 asking where the study is. We have some belief that when City Hall was renovated, that those files were put somewhere. And we actually have someone hired to go through and start going through the basement and digitizing all the records that are in the basement as they're related to transportation and drainage and other things. And I'm hopeful that maybe we can locate some things buried down there. But given that 10, 11 years people have been looking for that, I don't hold out a lot of hope. A lot of that work would have to have been updated. It's approaching 20 years old, so we'd want to update it anyway. And again, the stuff outside the area or the Stillwater city limits would not have been included in that. So why do we want to look outside the city limits? Upstream of Cow Creek, on Stillwater Creek, upstream of Cow Creek, which is basically 6th and Sanger, there's 133 square miles of drainage area. The 1% discharge, the 100-year discharge, the base flood, whatever you want to call that, the flow is 6,000 cubic feet per second. So take 7.5 times 6,000, that's how many gallon jugs are going down the stream every second. Upstream of Brush Creek, which is basically the downstream side of Stillwater, it's 185 square miles. The discharge there is 16,900 CFS. So in 133 square miles, we get 6,000. We add 52, and we get another 10,000 on top of that. If we have that kind of development, similar to what's in Stillwater, develop upstream from us over the next 40, 50 years, then Stillwater Creek, what we consider a 100-year event now, may very well be a 50-year event or something less, which then puts into jeopardy all the planning and improvements that have been made along that basin. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but I do think in terms of looking out into the future, we at least need to know what that number is. This is kind of the basin upstream from Brush Creek. This is Brush Creek right about here, and you can see the city limits in that. The goals for that would get us some solid data instead of just speculation. Where would we look at putting regional storage? We'd work with NRCS that has a lot of structures already upstream that were installed after the floods of 55 and 57. Lake McMurtry is part of that system, among others. And of course, we'd want to work with Payne County commissioners as to how we would do some of these things. We need to look at funding solutions of how to fund this. So those are all long-term strategic things, but we need some good data to start that. And again, this isn't something that's imminent, but I think it's wise for us to start looking at it. 40 years goes by a lot faster than I thought it would 40 years. I also want to include in there a breach analysis. I think we have a breach analysis for Lake Carl Blackwell and a breach analysis for McMurtry. Those are required for you to say, okay, if your dam's overtopped or they failed and you had a sudden release of water, what happens downstream? And you don't, when you're putting in a new dam, you design for what you can reasonably expect to be the maximum amount of rain that would come, and then you put a little freeboard on top of that. The issue that I see with Lake Carl, Blackmore, and McMurtry, they're so close to each other that in what we call the probable maximum precipitation, which is a theoretical number of how much moisture could possibly be in the air, then with those so close to each other, you could theoretically have both of them getting the maximum amount of precipitation. Now, would you ever want to design a structure or anything based on that? No. But it might be nice that in the very unlikely event it happened, it might be worth a few $5,000 or the few $1,000s to pull that out in your emergency manual plan and say, okay, in the unlikely event both of these happen, what are we going to evacuate and how are we going to do that? So I think that'd be money well spent. Again, that's just for emergency planning only. So any questions about the master drainage plan before we move on to some other things?
One question, Monty. You mentioned the rates for residential and commercial.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of property in Stillwater that is not residential or commercial. Churches, schools, OSU, USDA, whatever. How do they pay the same rates?
I don't know if they can answer that, but my understanding is it was calculated based on how much impervious area they had. And a residential unit has basically 5,000 square feet of impervious area. That's what they figured the average for a residential lot. So they would look at any type of use. And if it's not residential and it's over that, then that's what they would pay, is my understanding.
But do they? Do entities like the university that don't have utility bills from us pay a storm drainage fee?
No, sir.
Thank you.
But even the ones that do, the large commercial entities that do pay, they're capped at $55 a month,
That's
regardless of size.
Regardless of acreage. That's correct.
I'm not a really good judge of acreage. What's Walmart's parking lot?
Well, an acre's 200 feet by 200 feet roughly.
Football field.
So-
An acre's a football field.
Okay.
Yeah.
So more than one.
Yeah. And probably more than 9.
I just said I'm not a very good judge of acreage.
We can get that number for you.
I'm just wondering how many commercial properties in this town are capped,
Right.
are above the cap. I mean,
don't
it seems
know.
like a lot of them probably are.
Any other? Okay. So moving on, the projects we talked about, Duck and Miller, it takes about a 2 to 5 year event for water to really start ponding in Duck and Miller. This summer we replaced some pavement in there that was the result of water infiltration. We actually took some inlets out because we felt like that it's really not an issue of getting water into the system. The system isn't big enough to handle all the water, and part of our pavement issues were those inlets, so we actually took some out. To make that improvement, we actually need to start down at West Boomer Creek, which is all the way down here. There's some pipes from the creek across, I believe that's Lowry, then it's back to an open channel. This comes back in behind Daddy-O's, and then this is Miller up here. And so we're right about there on Main Street. This part of the system we think is probably adequate, but this chokes because this is inadequate. You can't get enough flow coming through here to keep it flushed out. So that actually, part of that gets clogged and over a period of time. So that would, improving this part would be a main consideration. Then somewhere in here, this part of the line becomes inadequate. This segment that goes through here, past the First Christian Church, and back up here and picks up Boone Pickens. That system is inadequate. And we know this system's inadequate down through here. Rather than replace all of that, since we've got to upgrade this, we just oversize this line. We'd bring it up here to about West Street, and then we'd run a line up to here and pick up flow. This part seems to be in pretty good shape, and we just take the overflow back this way. Seems like that's more economical. This is going to be Elm and West, Eskimo Joe's area, the stables, those, and we'd probably extend that line back to up to here to Elm as well. And that would go a long ways to solving those problems. 12th, between Duncan to Duck, it's south of the library. If you've lived here any time at all, you've seen that underwater. The channel downstream was upgraded several years ago with the Community Development Block Grant. That channel capacity looks pretty good. What happens is a massive amount of water comes down Duncan, jumps the crown in the street and 12th, and actually continues to the south, and then those first three residential structures on the west side of Duncan, south of 12th. First one gets water underneath it. The next one hasn't had water in it, but it's come close, so if we had much more of a storm, it would. The third one's actually had water in it. Of course, we had the potential for cars to float and then on downstream. So at a minimum, we'd start with a reinforced concrete box there at the low point, take it across the road to the north, then bring it up the north side, put some pretty massive inlets along Duncan Street to catch that water. Probably require that we have to raise the vertical alignment of the grade on 12th Street, which could actually help the sight distance on 12th and 12th and Duncan as well. And again, that would be this area right down in here. This is Duck, this is 12th, would be right here. This is Duncan as well. Duncan Street is a major channel, really. It drains. The reason I used this slide and didn't zero in, the drainage area actually goes up here to the other side of 6th Street and somewhere over here and catches all of this, and that's almost all pavement, so you get a lot of runoff. Block 34 is going to be sitting about this area, so I think that has some things that we've got to look at as we think about Block 34 as well. The other one that's kind of raised its ugly head in the last year or so is a line that starts at 6th and Orchard, goes up Orchard to about 4th over to Walnut, goes north of the way, then kind of diagonals across up the University in Monticello. Historically, there's been flooding at Orchard from 5th to 6th, and we've got pictures of the manhole on that drainage system being about this high with water flowing out of it. It's quite impressive, but it's not really something you want to see. But then on up to 3rd and Walnut to the east, there's some apartments. Okay. There's some apartments over there that have started to flood in the last year. They've had water in them 3 times, and the previous owner reports they never flooded when he had them, and the existing owners say they've never flooded until this past. So we started looking at that. We've got some problems with the line to the north. We think there's some problems with the inlets to it. We need to start at 6th and improve the capacity of the channel, and then replace some of the storm sewer, and then add additional storm sewer. And we also think it'd help if we could reconstruct the drive into the apartments, as well as add some inlets. That's a fairly expensive project. We think this is a stopgap project that we can fund, and this is where I'm going to ask for money from the fund. would repair, reconstruct some portions along Orchard. We'd add additional inlets at 3rd, just east of Walnut in the vicinity of the apartments, and some inlets on University Avenue because we think that water's not getting in there like it should, and then that water then is overflowing further south. The owners of houses have called and said they've almost had water in those houses between University and 3rd. We need to get in and remove and replace the clogged pipe. Then we, again, like to reconstruct the drive into the apartments. Basically, it's kind of at the curb grade, and at the gutter level, and doesn't rise up to the curb height. We think that would help keep some of that water out. The nice thing about this is 95% of this work is fully compatible with a future project. So it's stuff that if we did a project in there, we'd do anyway. And so we're asking that we fund that from the stormwater fee, and that means instead of having 2 years of cushion, we'd only have about a year of cushion. And again, here it is graphically. This is 6th, this is Orchard, this is the open channel part. This line, and again, this is why we want to, as part of the master drainage plan, update this. We're not real sure what size this line is, but we do know it doesn't run like this. We know it comes up to here and then goes to here, and we think it comes to here and then up and then like this. So get a better idea of what the alignment is, get the size. But right here's the apartments. We'd add inlets here. We'd add inlets here. Right in here's where the clogged pipe is. So we got to go through that parking lot, replace the pipes, and then asphalt back again. Any questions on that one?
I just have one, Monty. So when you say clogged pipe, and then you say immediately after that we need to replace them. Is there not like stormwater Drano you can use to unclog? How does that work? I'm trying to visualize this.
We have something in there that I don't think any of us have ever seen. It looks like that at some point in the future or in the past that there was a drain line that they tried to plug, and somebody went in there and we're assuming they put a bulkhead in and then tried to fill the line that they wanted to abandon with concrete. But instead, they half-filled the pipe with concrete.
I see.
And so it just really, unless we put somebody in there with a respirator and
Not strong.
a hammer and a chisel, that's about the only way we're getting that out.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Monty.
You bet. Any other sins you want us to confess?
I think it is we've talked about this before, but the lack of real inventory of some of our infrastructure, we don't know where our drainage lines run. That seems, for those of us who don't do this for a living, kind of crazy. The fact that we've got stuff out there that's built that we don't really know where it is. You've explained this before. Other people have explained this before. It's all built over many years. There's lots of different people. Stuff gets lost. Records get lost. But would this drainage study we're talking about would help us get a better inventory overall of our drainage
yes, it would.
Infrastructure?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Yep.
And we make sure those records don't end up in the basement somewhere?
We're going to add them to our digital GIS system.
To the GIS.
Yes.
I have a mini mic. I don't know if you guys are hazing me or what. If you can't hear me, it's because I have a little mic.
Yeah.
So they'll be added to a GIS
Yes.
inventory. I think just having a baseline of existing conditions is such a wonderful way to start making really informed decisions about projects and how we prioritize things and how we explain to folks that live near these areas that require improvements how we're prioritizing those things.
Well, and it's probably not great that we've had weather that we've had, but it also is a great visual in all of our minds about what has happened because some of these stormwater issues are happening, and so we need to get them address.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't we just give a commendation to some people from saving a lady from her flooded car on Orchard?
Yes.
Right.
So,
How long would a drainage study take?
Well, I think we would ask to do this over about a 3 to 5 year period so that we can kind of fund it over that long, and we'd prioritize which areas we'd start at. And you start at the lower end. But, I think give us 3 to 5 years to do it. Make sure we get it done right, and it's a long-term effort.
Well, and I do want to assure you that at this point, everything that's gone into the ground or into the air, hooked to poles over the last 20 years, has been recorded on the GIS. But it
Only
is
the stuff older than 20 years that we're worried about?
It is,
It-
and it's not only the council that's frustrated with that. It's
Sure.
those of us that are trying to find out what's happened in the past. So.
The reason why so many of those things are that way, when you start going back 50 plus years, the way that water superintendents and public works directors had job security, because those jobs tended to be political, they didn't tell anybody where the water lines and the storm lines were, only they knew. So you can't fire me, I'm the only one that knows where the lines are.
That's a terrible explanation, but it makes a lot of sense.
Moving on to Duck Creek north of 6th. That's a project that was actually designed in about 2008, would start at 6th, go north to Ridge. Then there's a branch that goes to 3rd, and then to north of 3rd to back behind those houses and back east to Willis. This is a copy of the plans. It kind of lays it out. This would be 6th, the vertical concrete channel up through here.
Monty, we lost your map.
You lost my map? Well, hang on a minute.
There you go.
So, there we go. Thank you. This is Ridge. We run alongside of Ridge. This is the branch goes up to the park there between 3rd and 4th. Then here's the branch that would come up underneath 3rd and around to the houses behind, go down to Willis. We have, about every time we have a big rain, we have at least one car drowned out in that intersection, or not that intersection, but that low spot. This is the FEMA floodplain. I believe I counted about 13 structures that we would take out of that floodplain if that project were done. And that's one that could be very quickly put together. Similar project with Babcock, the Babcock Basin. This is southwest of 19th and Western. There's some street flooding, some residential structures, but there's potential for more structures being flooded in a 100-year event. That was actually funded by a FEMA grant. The grant was received a few years ago, but the city didn't feel like they had the money to match the grant, so that grant money went away. It's a low-impact design, which means there's minimal use of concrete. It has detention ponds, channel improvements. It removes a number of existing and potential structures from flooding. And this is kind of what that looks like. This would be Western down here. This would be 19th. This is Ann Arbor Village sitting in here. And it would be, these are the houses that tend to flood right now. I think some more in here are flooded in the past. And then be improvements back in behind here and then back to here and coming on down. Play that channel as well. So that's what we've got for drainage. Again, the only thing we're asking for tonight is the master drainage plan and to do that stopgap measure up at 3rd and Walnut. And Zach's here to answer any questions you might have of the MS4 project and how some of these fit in with his water quality plans with the MSR4 projects as well.
So, Monty, those, when you say all you're asking for tonight is the plan, the study, and that one stopgap measure, what's the timeline on the rest of those projects?
Well, I think that would come as part of the fee structure. We've got those projects identified. There'd be others that we might identify as well. What's the reasonable level of capital funding we could expect? We know there's money available at the Water Resources Revolving Fund, that maybe we borrow that and then repay it with the fee. We also want to look at what we can do with the existing residences that have just nuisance flooding. When they call and say, well, gee, I've got a little flooding here in my backyard. We have situations where in the past, storm drains were just taken to the back between houses, and then they just empty there, and then they just kind of flow down people's backyards. And over a period of time, as those things silt up, somebody ends up with a pond in their backyard, and they come and want us to do something about it. Well, there's fences, there's structures, there's no easements. There's really not much we can do. Some of those would take all of our funds to try and get in there and do something from a maintenance standpoint. That's frustrating for us. It's frustrating for operations people to have to tell people no on those kinds of things. So if we had an adequately funded storm fee, we could address some of those issues. And also, as part of that, it'd be a policy of, okay, which ones are we going to do and which ones do we expect homeowners to maintain?
What's the price tag on all of that stuff, those projects?
No. Off the top of my head, I think it was like 11 million or something is what I had in mind.
To do all 4 of those, or 5, or however many there were?
Something like that. Yeah. It's not cheap.
No. Nothing is.
Well, that would be one of my questions too. If we're operating at $105,000 loss per year, we've got enough in reserve for 2 years, I think you said. If we add these projects on without any kind of rate change, how long can we operate?
Not very long.
Part of what we're going to ask you to do tonight is move some money around that would allow them to do that. And I would also, changing that subject, would like to point out that the council is aware that we're doing a comprehensive study on reducing the city bureaucracy and getting houses built. And as Roger, sitting in the back, would attest, we have told them, because of these kinds of existing drainage issues that go back for years, that there would be absolutely no quarter in that area, that drainage studies and appropriate catchment areas, if that's what you call them, in areas would be something that we would continue to look at quite closely. I also received information from Mr. Ghost a moment ago that the city let go their drafting person in 1984, so it took quite a few years for GIS to catch up on where some of those pipes were, and he's telling me, Monty, he can tell you where that one angled pipe is at 3rd Street.
Good.
Monty, you mentioned that one of those designs could have, was a low impact development?
Yes, mhm,
Was that
at the Babcock.
The future design was being designed as a low impact development?
I would anticipate that we would use that same design
The one that's been.
for Babcock that was already done. We would probably go back to FEMA and ask them to fund that again. We have gotten some indication from FEMA that they're open to funding things again. Valerie and Zach have been tasked to explore that, those sources of funds and projects that might be available to be funded. So that would be another source of revenue for us.
I was just curious with kind of the focus on sustainable design and low impact development in general, kind of in the stormwater world, if there were opportunities for grant funding, and if it was possible that some of that type of stormwater infrastructure might be less expensive and more attractive and kind of long-term sustainable to look at.
Certainly, those would be things we would look at. They're certainly less expensive. The trick is making them long-lasting and durable, and that's where the challenge comes. Okay. We're ready to move on to streets?
What's next?
Streets. Thank you, Zach. We have Greg Adams here. Greg, if you'd come on up as well. Greg's a recent hire. He started in July. He comes to us from the Kansas Department of Transportation. We're very pleased to have him. He has a similar background to what I have from ODOT, a lot of experience in road construction and the actual being out there on the ground and gives us a real nice feel for when you're trying to design things, whether or not it's practical when you're trying to design them. I want to start off by reviewing our pavement asset management program. Again, the whole concept behind that is we take the appropriate maintenance repair technique to the existing condition of the pavement, and we match those to get the greatest increase in useful pavement life at the optimal cost. We've talked about this before. Remember, we've talked about that the normal decline on pavement life looks something like this. And at some point, your street isn't worth doing anything to. Just the only thing you can do is tear it out and replace it. And we have a number of those kind of streets in Stillwater. And so folks who live on those streets or see those streets don't quite understand why we go and we overlay or do a microsurface on a road like 19th between Country Club and Sanger. Well, the reason for that is if we spend a little bit of money here, we drastically increase the life of that pavement. And so we take some of our pavement management money and we put on streets that we're trying to keep as long as possible. And then others, they're in worse condition, but we try to spend some on the good streets to keep it going as long as possible. Again, we have, this is the microsurfacing technique, which is what we did on 19th. This is where we come and mill off asphalt and we come back with new asphalt. We're going to do this on 12th Street. Some places we come in and completely tear out the whole street and replace it. And then sometimes we just do a spot repair and do replacement. We're looking at a third technique, and that's where we grind the concrete and grind it smooth. After the IMS study that we got that said that the streets are really in better shape than we thought structurally, it's just that they ride terribly. We started thinking, well, what can we do to increase the ride? And one of those in concrete streets is maybe we just come in and grind smooth to some extent. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's one of the things we're looking at as well. If you've driven I-35 down the Oklahoma City area from about US 66 on south, they've recently done that and improved the ride of those lanes very well. And here's the example. I'm talking about 19th from Sanger to Western. These are rough numbers, but they give you an idea. Say over the life of that pavement, we do 4 microsurfaces, and you should get about 7 to 8 years out of each time you do that. In 2018 dollars, you'd spend $500,000. We spent about $125,000 out there doing that work. that's going to maintain that pavement in the high 80s, maybe the low 80s, which is a pretty good number for your pavement. If we go to the traditional, we might do one overlay in that period of time. And in today's dollars, that'd be about $400,000. But your pavement ratings could at some point get a dip down into the 50s or 60s. Western Street that we're going to talk about in a little bit, portions of that and Hall of Fame, portions of that have not been touched since I helped build it in 1973. And so we're driving over surfaces that have been in place for 40 some odd years. The design life on the road was long past that. And typically with an asphalt pavement, you want to resurface them every 7 years. And so, you know, it's not unreasonably to say that you might do one asphalt overlay on that street in that period of time, and then you're going to let it, at some point, you're not going to spend any money on it until you rehab it, and we're going to spend well over $1 million rehabbing it or replacing it. So pay me now, pay me later. And so that's why we're doing some of these things. That's why we spend a little bit of money on some streets to try and keep them good so that 20, 30 years from now, we're not in the position we are right now of trying to come up with $55, $60 million. Because I need about $55, $60 million to fix all the streets.
Just to be clear, if we would have invested a few $100,000 at a time 20, 25, 30 years ago, we wouldn't need $55 million right now to replace all the streets.
That would be correct. And that doesn't touch the things that we've got to do for the step. Well, no, that's not true, because some of that money does include some of the step projects. But most of it is in pavement management. Also, one of the things Greg has been tasked with, and he's met his first milestone in that task, is we're going to develop a 5-year pavement management plan of how we're going to spend that half cents. And we'll bring that to you sometime after the first of the year. With that, we'll have various scenarios for funding and get some ideas of how much you want to put on local streets, how much on collectors, how much on arterials, and if we do local streets, strategies for doing that. Do we continue coming in and doing a little bit in this neighborhood and a little bit in that neighborhood, or we just bite the bullet and do a neighborhood over a couple of years and then go to another neighborhood, or just all kinds of things we're thinking through that we want to visit with you about how to move forward. The thing that's kind of exciting to both Greg and I is once we kind of get what we're going to do over the next 5 years, now we can think ahead in terms of having geotechnical studies done, know what our pavement design is going to be. It almost becomes an assembly line process, sitting with our outside consultants, and they then have an idea of the work that's coming their way, and we've got an idea of when we can bid that. We can hit the market, the bid market, maybe at the most advantageous time for us, as opposed to, well, we got to get this on the street because that money's been sitting there and people are after us to spend it, and it might not be the most advantageous time to enter the bid market. So we see a lot of positives with that. Again, 3 categories of projects that I've presented to you. The first is pavement management. The other is the Stillwater Transportation Enhancement Plan, or STEP plan. And then we're going to talk about multimodal, which is other modes of transportation other than an individual car. So the big one are the bridges. 3rd Avenue over East Boomer Creek, and that's at Perkins Road, and Husband Street over East Boomer Creek near the high school. 3rd Avenue Bridge, it has a sufficiency rating of 4. That's the lowest acceptable rating that ODOT allows you to keep a bridge in service. We've already had to derate the bridge, mainly because of emergency vehicles, fire trucks. I don't want to confess the sins of what that bridge looks like underneath, but I can tell you it's not pretty. Husband Street has a rating of 5, and it's having some issues as well. Those were both projects that were funded at some point in the past, and the design, or were going to be funded, and then the budget crunch hit. The design of those are about 90% complete. We could have those on the street in, we believe, January. Other streets, Western from 6th to Hall of Fame, and then Hall of Fame from Western to Washington. University Avenue from Western to Monroe. Monroe from 6th to University. 3rd Avenue from Perkins Road to Berry Street. Again, these are projects that we see based on the pavement management ratings and input from the public. The Transportation Enhancement Plan, these are projects that are part of the revision to that plan that's ongoing. The consulting transportation engineers completed their analysis of this system and has recommended projects. One of those is Sanger Road from 26th to 6th. Again, that was a priority project, and some preliminary design work and survey work was authorized on that. And the budget cuts have waylaid that one.
What would be done to Sanger Road in that section?
We would 4 or 5 lane it from about 26th to 6th Street. We looked at we asked the consultant to consider a 3-lane, and that wasn't adequate. We said, okay, well, if we improve if we improve Sanger Road to 4 and 5 lanes, does that help us with Western Street and maybe make that more desirable and take pressure off Western? And it didn't. So Sanger, if you've been out there in the mornings or in the afternoons when school's changing, traffic backs up from the school all the way to the light and beyond the light. And then people start driving through the neighborhoods trying to avoid that, and then we have issues in the neighborhood with people kind of going through the neighborhoods. Western needs to be improved from 26th to 19th. Of course, it's at the bridge from 12th to 19th in good shape, and then we pick it up 12th to 6th Avenue. That stretch of road is pretty much at capacity now and needs to be widened. It's going to be very expensive to acquire the right-of-way. When you look at an aerial photo of that, there's a motel that is going to be right in the way. And so we're going to be having to purchase portions of a motel to make that work. You've got Wicklow in there as well that may impact some of their parking, some of those types of things. So that's going to be a tough one to do, but maybe something we got to bite the bullet at some point. 19th from Country Club to Sanger is another one, and we've got 19th from Range to Country Club and from Sanger over to Western, so we've got a mile in there that really hasn't been improved. And then another stretch that's actually at capacity is Country Club from 9th down to 6th, and that's because of the shopping center and the development in that area. And so basically we just 5-lane that from 9th Street and then go back to 2 lanes from that point on. The enhancement plan would show doing Country Club on south for several miles, but we don't see that anywhere in the immediate future. Any questions on those streets?
Those are all basically capacity expansion projects.
Yep.
Not just
Exactly. They're not pavement management, they're capacity expansion, which we think would be better suited for other sources of funding and those types of things. Multimodal projects that we looked at was the Kamioka Trail extension from McElroy up to Husband and Franklin. Something we're going to talk about in a minute that Roger mentioned, the Husband Street corridor. One I'm really kind of excited about be safe routes at 19th and Westbrook. Talk a little bit more about that. And then a possible sidewalk along 19th along the south side from Countryside over to Arbor Circle. So let's go with the recommended projects first, and we'll start with the bridges. Like I said, they're 90% complete. We think we can be ready to bid those in January. With construction, we would expect to start within 60 days after that. This is what, did I just mess up? Okay, here we go. The cross-section across the bridge down here would have a raised sidewalk, it would have a bike path, it would have a travel lane, have a turn lane, and then repeat on the other side. Through lane, a bike path, and then a sidewalk. So we'd accommodate bike and pedestrians into the future. That's a fairly expensive bridge, but I think it's important to go ahead and do that. Hopefully this one, the one that's there's been there 52 years, we'd hope this one would last a little longer than that. And that'll provide a nice access to people east of Perkins Road for future improvements in that area. This is kind of what it looks like in a plan view. Here would be the bridge. You can see this is the existing street, so you can see how much wider that will be, and then we got to transition back down to it. Husband Street, we'd maintain a 26-foot roadway through there and have a 6-foot 8-inch trail, possibly on both sides. When you look at this from in an aerial view, there's not much going on right here on this side for a for a sidewalk. Again, I'd argue we should go ahead and build that now in case we ever extend those sidewalks on that side as well. Any questions on those two?
That was just bridges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's going to total a little over $3 million to do those two projects. We go to streets, Western from 6 to Hall of Fame. This is where we talked about we'd grind the Portland cement concrete portion of that from 6 to 3rd and then come back and seal the cracks. We would do that portion under our pavement management projects. Again, we're looking at other streets that we want to do that with. To get the optimum unit price on that, you need to have more quantity than what that would have. And so if we're going to use that technique, then we need to get the best price, and we think it would work. We've got several candidates that we're evaluating to see if that's going to be a viable technique, and we're kind of excited. We think it will. Then on the asphalt section, we'd mill off 4 to 5 inches, and then we'd put a Portland cement concrete overlay back down. That road was constructed very well. It has 6 inches of lime stabilization for a base, and then a little over 12 inches of asphalt underneath it. So it's a pretty hefty section, so we think we could take 4 inches, maybe up to 5, and come back with concrete. That'd give us about another 20 to 25 years that we really wouldn't have to do much of that road in that period of time for the expense. We're doing something we're doing the same thing in our current program that we have under design at Miller and Boomer intersection, where that comes across on the super elevation and it's slanted. We're going to do that same thing, mill that out, put some concrete down. As part of that, we asked the engineering firm to get with a professor up at OSU that's developed quite a reputation across the country in pavement design and concrete. In this, we call this white topping or unbonded concrete overlay of asphalt. I went to a seminar on this, and 3 of the 5 projects they put up were projects from Stillwater. One was 6th and Perkins before that was rebuilt. One project was at the hospital, and then 1 or 2 out at the Meridian Votech. And then I went to another seminar, and they were talking about all these things you can do with concrete now and all these additives and all these wonderful things they can do. And they mentioned this professor from OSU. And I'm going, we got this guy in our backyard. Why don't we utilize his talents? And so we're pretty excited about having his expertise to help us make sure we do this properly and get the best life out of the concrete we can. So anyway, that's what we would do on Western, and then we'd jump over the part that was done, with the improvements to that intersection at Farm Road and Hall of Fame and Western, and then about Ridge Avenue, we'd pick that up, and we'd terminate at Monroe Street. From Monroe over to Washington, part of that section is concrete underneath that asphalt, and so it would probably be best just to tear all that out and replace it. And I don't think we can quite stretch the money that far this year, and we'd come back and do that some other time. University Avenue is a project we get a lot of discussion about. We've got that listed, as you saw it, at about $8 million to fix that project right. A lot of that cost is in water line that runs through there that's 50 plus years old, that serves quite a few of the water towers. So that would likely have to be replaced as part of that project. And we've had some very brief discussions with folks at OSU, and of course I worked in their planning group for a while as well. But with some changes that could happen up there, we may not need University to be quite the street that it's been in the past, and maybe it's not worth spending that kind of money on. So while we study that, we think we need to do something rather than just keep it in the condition it is. But we do think it's worth coming in, taking the humps off, and put a microsurface overlay on it to try and level it up some, and then put another level on it. We think we can maintain the drainage through there and not make it worse by doing that. And that'll buy us several years while we do some of that long-range planning, improve the ride, and get rid of some of that rough riding. And that we would do out of our pavement project money as well, and so we're not asking for funds to do that. We just wanted to let you know that I'm sure most of you have heard from people about that street, and that's our thoughts on that. Any questions on the streets that we've presented?
Well, I guess maybe just one about how have these been identified as the priorities?
As the priorities?
Yeah.
Well, the bridges, because of their sufficiency rating. The streets, Western and Hall of Fame, because of their rating in the pavement management inventory. They're down there in the area where you tear them out and rebuild them or do something major to them. Add to that, they're high traffic. They're 20,000 vehicles a day or more. It presents an image to the community or to visitors coming to the community. What I didn't talk about on Western and should have is part of that cost includes adding a trail on the east side. And as I put in the report, a trail along the east side from 6th up to the intersection with Farm Road, and then you connect with the trail that was down on Western. That gets you to Lakeview. Then at Lakeview, you connect to the trail that's there that takes you to Boomer. You get to Boomer, you get on the Kamioka Trail, and you get all the way to Parkview Estates. And so now you can go from 6th and 6th and Western all the way basically to Richmond and Perkins Road if you're so inclined to do that on a bicycle. As we do Airport Arterial, we'll extend that around to Sanborn Lake, that area, and then that'd be another connection through there. So that would be included in those projects as well.
Well, you noted that high visibility, high traffic counts, and poor quality on that section.
Yes.
The report talks about University not being particularly high traffic count right now and potentially not being
Right.
high traffic count in the future.
Yeah, the university's about 2,300, so it carries about a tenth as to what Western's carrying.
So are we putting that on the list because people complain about it or because it really needs to be?
Well, it's also rated very low in the pavement management as well. It has a very low ranking as well, and it's in bad shape.
Sure, yeah, and I would never dispute that. My question is are there roads with higher traffic counts with bigger problems?
With bigger problems than that.
Right, I mean, it's,
Possibly, but again, we try to look at chunks of money in the different categories. And so in the category that we would put that in, that would fit.
okay.
That would fit. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, I guess I do have one question. When you pick out these places, I know, going on Will's question, there are criteria that you use to choose them. I'm presuming that the new 5-year plan that you work on, the pavement management plan, doesn't make these look like just spots. That there'll be it will look like there's a flow from, if you're going to fix this over here, then
Yeah.
you're going to fix this and then this and this. Is that a correct assumption?
That would be one of the goals that we would look at. That's correct. Instead of just blindly looking at what the numbers say, and you got a bad stretch here and a bad stretch here and a bad stretch here, and so you go fix all those bad stretches. Maybe we get a better bang for our buck, and it makes more sense to look at it from a regional standpoint and consider traffic counts as part of that as well. Because we modified the program that you approved this year because it had some streets that were dead end that had 5 or 6 residents that the program said you should completely rebuild that street. And I just couldn't justify spending those kind of dollars for that kind of stuff. But we did stuff, we just didn't rebuild the street. Okay. Anything else? Okay, moving on to talk about multimodal and the Husband Street corridor. That fits with the concept of trying to put a bicycle network within the street network. And instead of us trying to put bikes and vehicles on high-speed roads, maybe we should look at trying to find a ways where bikes can be kind of the dedicated mode of transportation. You still got to provide access to everyone along the street. But doesn't mean that has to be the primary mode of transportation through there. So you do that by limiting the through motorized traffic. We do partly with that with a special signal that they call a toucan signal, which is short for toucan pass. And I've got a picture of that here in a minute. You create an island for the bicyclists at major cross streets to pull up to, and then they push a button just like a pedestrian would push a button, and it activates the signal, and it stops the cross traffic on the arterial or major street. But a car will not trigger that. It's just a bicyclist or a pedestrian that happen to be there. And then, so your main thoroughfare isn't really stopped that often until your bike traffic count gets as high as the vehicle traffic count. And then maybe we put in a full signal. But for the interim, it's a very nice way to accommodate bicyclists and get them across the street and pedestrians across the street safely with minimal impact to people in a vehicular mode of transportation. Roger's correct. We've talked about this, and this kind of came up at the last minute. We have not fully vetted this throughout the community. Roger and I have talked about this, that it's maybe something you want to run through the Planning Commission. We certainly would want to take it, I think, by the Chamber Infrastructure Committee and get their input. One of the things that makes these things work is where you put the toucan signal is you only allow right turns. Well, at Hall of Fame and Husband, that could impact those existing businesses. What we would not want to do is put a system in that's going to limit people's sales that we're getting sales tax off of as well. So we don't want to do anything to jeopardize their business or, because we get a portion of that as well. So I think the way that we're talking about doing that, at Hall of Fame and Husband, you could probably allow full turns. Because as part of this project, we'd remove the bridge on Husband Street that's not in real great shape. It's in better shape than the others, but it has its issues as well. The vertical alignment on it's bad. We would pull that out and we'd replace it with a new pedestrian bridge. Well, that would stop your through traffic. So there wouldn't be need to force them to turn right. And you're not generating that much vehicular traffic to the north, so whatever little there was, if they wanted to turn left or go straight through, that's not going to impact them either. So it would still probably work fairly well. As part of this project, we would widen the sidewalks along Hall of Fame East to Kamioka Trail. And then we've got a couple of possibilities for then connecting the trail down into Strickland Park. And so both of those will be challenging, but we think we can overcome those. Again, we begin at Boomer and Husband. We'd have a signal at McElroy. That would restrict north and southbound traffic to where you had to turn right. We don't see that, again, as being a huge detriment because most of the traffic going south now does turn right at that location. If you can visualize that, you're coming south on Husband Street through Boomer, you get to McElroy. If you're going to the university, you're going to turn right. If you were going to go on further south, at Boomer, you would have got on Boomer and over to Main, and you can still do that and go that direction. So restricting people from going straight through or from turning left should not be that much of an inconvenience, nor do we think it'll be an impact to the businesses along there. We need to get their input to make sure, particularly McDonald's. As I just mentioned, we'd take the bridge out over West Boomer Creek at that location and replace it with a wide pedestrian bike bridge. There'd be a signal at Hall of Fame. We talked about not necessarily needing to restrict turns there. When you get to Husband and Miller, would want to restrict through traffic at that location. Again, we don't see that as an issue because there's really not a lot of traffic going south at that location anyway. That would still let people that come out the backside of Panera or come out of the hotel there to turn left and go south and then do whatever they want to once they got to Miller. We'd have a signal at Third. That one we need to evaluate what right turn restrictions we'd want at Third and Husband and how that might impact the bank drive-through. And then at Fourth and Husband, the BPAC committee makes a very good point that if you stop the southbound folks, they now have that hill. They got to start climbing from a standing stop, and it'd be nice if they could go straight through and not have that stop. It's a four-way stop now. We convert it back to two-way. Since we're trying to limit vehicular traffic, that might be an okay thing to do. Of course, we always have concerns from safety when we go from four-way stop to two-way stop, and vice versa from 2 to 4. But those would be things we look at. So here's a picture of the Toucan signal. You can see at that location they just paint the right turn. This is at Fort Collins. It's Pitkins Road in Fort Collins. I think Councilor Darlington has been there and looked at that and might have some comments about that as well. But that's the way it's set up. You can see right there the signal only for the bicyclist, and then traditional signals for the through traffic. Other project that I'm kind of excited about is what we call safe routes at 19th and Westbrook. We believe we've got a project figured out where we can put some concrete in some select locations, and we can connect all of the neighborhoods north of 19th between Sanger and Country Club and 19th and 6th, connect all of those down to the 19th Avenue sidewalk, extend the sidewalk on the north side down to Westbrook, put a signalized crossing, a pedestrian crossing at 19th and Westbrook, get them safely to the south side, and then get them up to the schools, and then consequently to the neighborhood south and east. We think that project would qualify for some grant funding, and we really wouldn't want to fund that till we explore those opportunities. We think that would be we got a lot of input from folks concerned about those three uncontrolled crossings that are now on 19th. I drive that multiple times a day. It's not unusual for me to see people blow through those crosswalks when people are waiting to cross. We think that's a project well worth consideration. But again, we think we probably ought to wait to see if we can get some grant funding.
When you say connect all the neighborhoods north of 19th between Country Club and
Yep.
all the way to 6th, so like all those neighborhoods that you can't even get to off 19th, like with a car, you could.
Actually, you can if you know the right streets to take,
Oh,
which the people who live in there would know
yeah. Okay.
how they can meander through there. Some of it's sidewalks, some of it are low volume local roads that be safe for you to walk or ride a bike on. Yeah.
Would that be safe routes to school grant funding?
That's what we're thinking, and we haven't run that by the school yet either. But that would be a project we would look at. So that's our report. I think all of that totals about $6.2 million on those projects that we recommended. Of course, we could defer the Husband Street corridor to a later discussion, and as you noticed. That exceeds the $6 million we've talked about. As I put in the report, we've got a pretty hefty contingency on that. And if we did end up needing all that contingency, most of that does qualify for, or is out of the pavement management. And so it'd be appropriate to take that extra funding out of the half cent, because those would be projects that we would have done out of that project anyway, out of those funds anyway. Any questions?
I did have some questions from BPAC, and one in particular was why the Husband Street project didn't go all the way to 6th Street, which kind of goes to my other question about, it feels like, well, let's just do this, and then what do you do at 3rd Street?
Sure. Actually, once we fix the traffic, or change the traffic control at 4th and Husband, it basically goes to 6th, because your next one's 5th, which is already stopped for the other, and then you're to 6th. So any striping we'd do, we'd take it all the way to 6th. You're correct. We wouldn't stop it at 3rd. We'd take it all the way. My original thought was once you get to 3rd Street, you're basically in the downtown area, and you're starting to let folks go. But BPAC mentioned that, and they mentioned the 4th Avenue signage, and I think those are valid arguments, and we would do that. But I'm sorry I didn't get that clarified.
I'm just curious, language-wise, you talk about multimodal plan. Where does complete streets fit into this?
Well, what do you call a complete street? What do you call multimodal? And that's some of it. I guess we kind of use it one across the other. When we do a project, how are we going to accommodate everybody? Is that complete streets? Fine. Is it multimodal? Fine. The point is, when we're looking at streets, we try to figure out a way to accommodate the bicyclist and the pedestrian as well. If we ever get, we to some extent, as we're looking at traffic, we consider OSU's transit system. We consider those when we're designing radiuses for the intersections. Can their vehicles make those corners? And some of this is just ingrained in what we do anyway to accommodate vehicles.
I guess in my dream, you wouldn't have necessarily 3 sections of proposals. It would be, we're doing streets and we're doing transportation for everyone, and it's not
Sure.
pavement management step.
I agree with that. I broke it out this way in part for you to understand your policy of resolution and now policy of looking at all forms of transportation, and that we are doing that, and showing that staff is accountable to that, and we understand that, and a substantial percentage of these costs are to accommodate those per your direction, and that we haven't just given lip service to that. So that was really the purpose for breaking those out.
I did visit Fort Collins last weekend, not just to look at streets, but to visit family. But we drove around and saw quite a number of these areas, and talked to Monty about it. A lot of paint on the green lanes, and Monty pointed out the expense of that. There are some other possibilities of other designs. Fort Collins has some, I called them teardrops, but they're not really. They're circles with little arrows on the edges.
We can make them teardrops.
No, let's not make them sad. Let's figure something out.
We can make them smiley faces.
One of the issues that my daughter mentioned is an issue in Fort Collins with trying to redo a lot of intersections, making them bike, turning, not turning, it's stimulus overload. There are just signs and lights everywhere. Although the intersection that Monty showed at Pitkin, I really did like the bicycle signals that have the stencil of the bicycle on the light, so you don't have to guess who it's for. And then the small lower stop signs that are for bikes that say bike stop, or and then the push buttons to work the signals. But it was a lot of paint, very little like protected lanes. In a few areas where there were curved streets, there were those rubber things that stick up.
Candlesticks.
That's what they look like, yeah. But in some areas, it would have been really helpful to have. Yeah, it was very interesting. And I'm
Of course, the challenge in all this, I'm sorry.
Pursue that. I hope you will continue to pursue
Sure.
those things.
Of course, the challenge in all this is paint requires maintenance, and then that includes our maintenance budget. So we have to look at those things as well. There's lots of tools in the bag, and you just got to pull out the best one that does what you need to do, that gives us the least overall cost, including maintenance.
And I do appreciate how you explained everything, and I said it's in my dreams when we have one look at this. But you will have BPAC involved on all of these projects?
Sure. I think we're meeting quarterly, and just like we got input on this report. They called a special meeting. We got some input from them when we put this report together, and we'll continue to do that. And as long as you tell us that you want advice from anybody, we listen to it and follow the advice.
Good. I like that you follow that advice. Yeah, not only listen. Yeah.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
So, I think it's great to see from the bridges and all the other plans about putting in sidewalk, bike lane, that we are building a complete street when we do these, especially the western, the work on western north of 6th, adding that trail or sidewalk there is a huge plus. I would assume on those projects like Sanger, when you're talking about potentially, widening Sanger, that all
Yes.
includes
Yes.
nice wide sidewalks and
Yes,
accessibility.
it does. And that, the 19th would be the same as well.
Okay.
And we truly can't fix the sidewalk issues on 19th until we do that, widen it, and put a lot of dollars in it because of the drainage.
The husband idea is a really cool one. I think it probably does need some publication or publicization. What is that a word there? Publicizing.
Publicity.
Publicity. That's a good word. Where did this come from? I mean, did the BPAC bring this idea? I mean, how did we identify husband as the one to do this on? I mean, give me some background here.
So, two things. One, it's when I started thinking about taking the job and then took the job, I was going, how do you keep bikes and cars separate? I tell people it's physics 101. You know, the speed and mass of vehicles versus a bicycle and a pedestrian. So how do you accommodate all those together, and how would you make that work? And then someone on BPAC, and I don't remember who it was, sent this article about Pitkin in Fort Collins, and I went, well, that's one way to look at doing it. And so we started exploring that idea and concept, and where would it make sense to fit that. The intersection of Husband and McElroy is problematic with a lot of vehicles because of the signal at McElroy and the signal at Boomer, and some people think it's a four-way stop, and we have accidents there. So, you know, maybe it helps solve that problem. We got a bridge that's in bad shape, and just all these things started coming together. How do we connect Camioca Trail and get it across McElroy and up through that area? Well, maybe we widen the sidewalks in Hall of Fame down to that point, and now it's a tough problem to solve, but still, you've just got a relatively short problem to solve from Hall of Fame down into Strickland Park. So it just, when you stand back and look at it from where I was sitting, it just started making sense for at least to explore the idea seriously and in depth, because it just solves so many problems, or helps reduce them.
Yeah, and I assume our bicycle crowd here, we see you. Hello, thanks for coming. I assume you guys are here because you like this idea and have had input, and I see a lot of nods, so that's a good thing. Thank you.
They must really like it because they sat through a long.
I know. We really tortured them with it.
And it's freezing in here.
It is a little chilly. All right, we're getting late this evening. Thank you, Monty, for all the information.
I'm sorry I kept it
No,
long.
that's a lot of stuff to talk about. Let's go to the next one. Item 4, is that where we are? Sub item 4?
Sub-item 4, let's see here. Correct. So coming back to asking for authorization to go out for a request for proposal for a rate study for the stormwater fees. And you can tell from Monty's presentation, I think this is long overdue. I had a hard time finding the documentation on the stormwater fund to begin with, because it is from 1997. And then the fact that the fees haven't been evaluated since that point in time, it's long overdue. So we would go out for request for a proposal and see exactly what it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. And then the fifth item there on for the city council to consider this evening, and I think this is not a hard ask, is for us as staff to look at a general fund reserve policy in depth and bring back to you a proposal that would be in effect with the preparation of the fiscal year 20 budget of what that reserve would look like for the general fund.
But
And
that- Go ahead.
And I would add an RSF
Yeah.
cap to that as well.
And if we go on and we have an SUA meeting, I know it's getting late, but there are some just quick things there, and that's one of them. We want to do another comprehensive study on the rate stabilization fund as well.
Yeah, so this policy would be about how our reserves work on the general fund, but then we'll also discuss a
We
reserve
would
policy in
have
the
a policy
SUA.
for each reserve, regardless of what we call it. If it's set-aside designated money, we're going to have a policy for it.
Yeah.
And at least in the form of a resolution from this body or from the governing body, there are some times where an ordinance might be appropriate for a reserve fund as well. So we will help bring that to you in a form that you can make those decisions.
Okay.
Melissa, so we'll have a policy for that, for those funds, but will we also, I know you've mentioned that we'll do a rate study for stormwater, and maybe this is SUA, but we'll also, I think that part of, personally, I feel like as we develop policy for the cap of those funds, we should also set a policy for making sure that we are assessing our rates.
Yes.
Every so often, so that we're right-sized with our rate.
Oh,
whether it's, they need to come down or they need to go up. I think that's an important.
Absolutely. I don't know if we can jump to the proposals in SUA, or if you want to close out the city council and we come into SUA.
Yeah, we'll finish out here.
Okay,
And
okay.
jump to
Because
that.
they're kind of, you're right, Counselor Zalowski, they're hand in hand with each other. They really-
And that is one of our recommendations, and this is kind of awkward. It may be that we need to recess city council after, and we still have an employee
We still had to,
raised to deal with, and
Yeah.
because if you choose not to transfer any funding, we can't do any of these things. So we have recommendations for you on the transportation, on stormwater under city, but some of those funds have to be transferred
Heard
into
from
the
the
SUA
SUA.
meeting.
And
Yes.
And again, if you need
Okay. I see what you
time, you can
Well-
tell us that, and we'll bring back formal resolutions on the 15th.
I think that would be best, that we'd hear the recommendations about how you guys want to do this for the city stuff. We'll hear the recommendations on SUA stuff.
Okay.
And then we'll come back next meeting for actual vote on a resolution to
And then I
adopt all
think
that stuff.
we structured this such that we have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So.
So from the city side of things, the cost of living increase is I think the other issue
Right.
we want to talk about tonight.
HR Director Christy Looper's here if we have any specific questions, but basically, she prepared a memo that you all were in your packet, and she surveyed several different sites looking at what were reasonable rates to adjust salaries by, and the one that we've kind of landed on is 4%. 4% for full-time employees, which this excludes our union employees, police and fire, and 4% for the part-time staff. These are separate motions that you would be able to consider separately and decide separately.
So just a note from the memo, the last across-the-board salary adjustment for general employees was July of 2014,
Correct.
and we're talking about a 4% increase from current salaries, right? Not a 4% annualized increase since 2014.
No, it's just a
Right.
flat 4%.
So certainly the cost of living has increased more than 4% since 2014.
Right.
Right.
But we're just starting from now.
We're just starting for 4%.
And when you say excluding union, police and fire union pay, just so everyone's aware, those salaries have increased
Every year.
every
yes.
year under union contracts
Correct.
at a somewhat similar rate. And so we're not excluding them because we don't want to
No.
give them raises.
No.
Because we already have.
We have, yes. We have.
Okay. Questions about raises? council?
Okay.
Are you done?
I'm done until you're ready to go on to SUA.
Okay. Councilors, any further questions on general orders, the council items that we've heard tonight about the possible uses of these funds if we transfer them out of the SUA? Hearing none.
Do we need to wait? I guess this is one that I'm pretty passionate about. Do we need to wait and vote on all of these next week, or is there one that we can?
Well, so to fund any of this stuff, we've got to go to SUA first and transfer money.
We do.
We can, I mean, I guess we could have a motion on all of these items for council, to instruct council to prepare.
You can make a motion to direct staff to come back at the next meeting on the 15th with a resolution.
Implementing this
for each
stuff.
of them? Okay.
Okay.
Would there not be a motion heard to go ahead and move forward with the employee staff raises tonight? If one were so inclined to make that motion?
You are entitled to make it.
You could do that.
Finishing my thought.
You're welcome.
You, I
I mean,
will,
obviously, we need to go to SUA first and
Right.
and deal with those funds.
but I will say too, if you need the time to think, we do have that time available for you because we want this to be effective with the first paycheck in December. And I've consulted with the finance director, and she's been working with her payroll staff. We've worked with HR as well. And both of those departments feel like that would give them ample time because there's some work in the background that needs to go on with this kind of an across-the-board raise. But we do have that time. It's just what you all feel comfortable with this evening.
Counselors, motions, questions, comments? I mean, we could, I mean, each of these items has each of these four items right on the agenda has recommendations with them.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, sir.
We could go down the list and either decide to move it forward, say, vote on it now, vote to have a resolution next week, however you want to do
I
it.
think for me, this is the one I'm comfortable voting on tonight,
Okay.
but I don't know how the rest of the council feels.
So let's
We need
do this, hold on a second, let me just do this systematically a little bit. So on item A1, funding sources and general reserve policy overview, CC-18-112, what are the staff recommendations on that item?
So the first recommendation would be to retain $2.8 million in the general fund from fiscal year 18 to be allotted to transportation and stormwater projects.
Okay.
And that does not require SUA to be done under
No,
SUA.
that money resides in the general fund, and it would just be you're telling us not to move it back to the SUA.
Okay. And then the other recommendations are around the salary increases for both full-time and part-time.
Correct.
An RFP on the stormwater and the general fund reserve policy.
Right, right.
On the 4% raise piece, this is an ongoing recurring expense. right?
Correct.
Not coming just out of that 2.8 million we've got this year.
Correct.
Right? Have we done
We have, and the fact that we have this size of a budget variance, budget to actual, we will adapt. We will add that raise in, and then our staff clearly will adapt to that difference between what is programming and what is personnel costs.
Okay. So, I mean, that doesn't necessarily depend on an SUA transfer at this point
No,
either.
not at this. Yeah, it does.
It'll partly be funded by an SUA
Yeah,
transfer this year.
for this initial year, yeah.
And the RFP rate study is based on?
Is mainly just an ask. If you are comfortable with us moving forward on that, you can approve that this evening or direct staff to move forward with that.
And the same with the general fund reserve
Correct,
policy?
correct.
Okay. So, does anybody want to make any motions regarding these 5 recommendations? It'd probably be best to do them individually.
I don't have to do them in order.
Well, I don't care how you do it.
Well, but if I'm talking about the salary increases, we need to go to the SUA, correct? And
There is a funding component, yes, in the SUA.
Well, yeah, we'll have to recess and.
assess this, go to SUA.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's
That's
an
all right.
easy
That's
way
all right.
with this.
So
But number one does not.
number one doesn't.
I
Motion
will-
to approve
would
staff recommendations for number one, to retain $2.8 million in the general fund from fiscal year 2018 to be allotted to transportation and stormwater projects.
Second.
So, yeah.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to retain $2.8 million from the general fund in fiscal year 18 for transportation and stormwater projects. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that's approved.
Okay.
Motion to direct staff to go ahead with an RFP for a rate study for stormwater rates, with full implementation by January 2020.
2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to direct staff to prepare for an RFP for stormwater rates. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that item is approved.
Motion to direct staff to create a general fund reserve policy to be effective with the preparation of the fiscal year 20 budget.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to direct staff to prepare a reserve fund policy. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that item is approved. I think we could all say thank you to Liz for the preparation of these minutes later on. Okay. Items under transportation capital projects and stormwater capital projects are all going to depend on an SUA transfer, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, at this point, recess the city council meeting, and I will call to order the Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting for October 1st, 2018. And we will jump to consent docket. Council, questions? Go ahead.
Motion to approve the consent docket.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Please vote. Thank you, trustees. I think I called you counselors, but that was wrong. Down to item 5, general orders, status on organization-wide cash balances with recommendations for utilization overview of fund or reserve calculations. Melissa.
Okay. Again, the background summary is identical. We looked at cash from a standpoint of all revenue collected and all bills paid at 2018, at the end of 2018, fiscal year 2018. And from that point, we saw that there was a need to start looking at the reserves because their balances were high. And the projection on out into the future, they were going to grow again. So recommendation number 1 for the SUA is we propose a rate study to prepare an RFP for a rate study for the electric utility and the water resources utility with full implementation by January of 2020. And I'm not, Christy is much more an expert on rates than I am, but there are component pieces to each one of those rates that go in, and one of those pieces may be to fund capital projects. If the projects don't ever get off the drawing board, but the cash continues to build up, it's not a very defendable position to be in. And so that's why we want to come back and not only analyze how we're putting the money in there, why we're putting the money in there, but also how the money is being generated, which is through rates. Secondly, we're asking you to defer the automatic electric rate escalator that will happen in January of 2019. I attached several different, I think they were resolutions that approve that automatic escalator. There's nothing that really happens. It all happens behind the scenes because the approval has already been granted. We feel like that this is important hand in hand with that rate study. We don't want the rates to continue to go up artificially if not needed. So we're asking you to defer that until we can get this rate study completed.
So just to be clear, that wouldn't, that's not an an action against the existing resolution. It doesn't affect the existing resolution. It's just a deferral of this year's automatic escalation
Correct.
indefinitely.
Yes, until we get
Until
the
we have a rate
results of the
study.
rate study. Yes. And the rate study, we wanted it to be implemented by January of 2020. So in essence, we're asking you to defer 1 year and then get the recommendations, because it would start on January 1st of 2019. It would go up again.
That's the one we'd be deferring.
Correct. Correct. And then by that time, we should have our rate studies completed and recommendations from that study for you to consider before the next escalator would come into effect.
Okay. And just, I mean, I'm not sure if people know this, but your electric rates go up 3% every year, automatically,
It happened. Yeah.
by resolution of the council in 2000, of the SUA in 2007.
Trustees, yes.
The
Yeah.
trustees in 2007.
Correct.
And what we're going to do is say, we seem to have plenty of money in the SUA right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not increase rates 3% this year because we don't seem to need that money.
Right.
And let's take a look at whether our rates need to be changed in some way.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, we could use it.
Well, I'm not saying we couldn't use it. Just wanted to be clear why we're collecting it.
Right. Yes. Thirdly, I alluded to this earlier in the evening. Waste Management had a reserve fund set up for it back in November of 2015. And every year, it was supposed to, $250,000 was supposed to be added to the reserve until it hit its maximum of $1 million. Well, at the end of this year, it became apparent that the Waste Management General Fund had quite a bit of cash in it, $2.7 million. And so Mr. McNichol and I and Christy Cluck talked, and we felt like it would be prudent to go ahead and completely fund that reserve, cap it at $1 million, and then leave a little bit there for seed money for the next year, and then transfer $1.8 million out of the waste management back to the general fund to help fund the transportation and stormwater projects that Monty visited with you about this evening. So, with that said, we'd need to move $621,881 out of the Waste Management General Fund to the Waste Management Reserve Fund, and that would get it to its $1 million. If it stays at its $1 million, no more money gets added to it. If, like this last year, remember we had the street sweeper that got hit by a car and we had to replace it, well, we used this reserve money to replace that street sweeper. And nobody, really knew that we were without a street sweeper. So that's that one. And then we would transfer $1.8 million of the remaining money over to the general fund to be used for transportation projects and stormwater projects. And that would leave that fund a beginning balance of $316,310 to start the year with.
The Waste Management Fund has $2.7 million in its general fund right now.
Yes.
Which is excess rate collection over expenses.
Yes, and kind of what has happened, it can participate in the transfer over to the general fund. We have not, for the past couple of years, we haven't really gone and gotten its share. We've just left it in waste management because the electric utility could fund it all. Mm-hmm. And so it really is.
So we're charging like we're going to transfer money out, but we're not transferring
and then we
money
didn't
out.
do it. Mm-hmm.
And we've already authorized the rate study for waste management, correct?
Correct. And it's gone out. Chris Knight has done a request for qualifications. We're really hoping to kind of leverage some of the work he's done and expedite the rate studies on electric and water resources.
And how do we feel about our reserve policy on this waste management reserve?
On the $1 million, I think it's appropriate.
Do we know what we're going to spend that money on? We know what's
it really is more of a, if we have an event like the street sweeper being hit, and it seems like there was some other things that happened. There is a whole policy that went along with that, and I gave you a copy of that. That doesn't mean that we can't go back and look at this again. And we will review this one as well, just like the others, even though I feel more comfortable with this one than I do some of the others.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is it possible that as a part of the rate studies, there could be some sort of assessment or evaluation of what the right size is for some of the, like,
Oh,
for that reserve?
absolutely,
I mean, it would
absolutely.
seem to me that that's probably something that whoever comes in and supports that kind of rate study or evaluation would be able to also help us
Now,
determine what right sizes. may be
right.
for the-
Now, if you're willing to wait for that, we were really going to try and take a first stab at this ourselves and get that in place when I start preparing the fiscal year 20 budget, which is maybe like next month that I'm going to get started on that. So I don't think it would hurt for us to come in and kind of do our own internal evaluation, and then certainly once we get the consultant identified, that would be part of their scope of work as well, to come back in and review what we've already done and the changes that we see need to be made.
That check for kind of a system.
Yeah.
On each of those with some support, kind of what, you know, what other folks are doing and how they, just having that input, I think would be really important.
I think I'm going to send, Christy and I listened to a webinar the other day put on by the American Public Power Association, and it was about determining an appropriate reserve, and it was aimed at an electric utility. But I think the methodology can be applied across the board. And so what I'll do in the morning is I'll try and send you all out that, it's just PowerPoint slides, but I thought it was really well done. And I think it's a methodology that can be very defendable into the future. So then going down to item number 5, we have a fund that is what we call administratively designated. We have had a hard time finding any documentation on this fund. And basically, this money was set aside by some very forward-thinking finance officials or finance employees back in 2007, 2006. It's been sitting there, and really, I think it was the precursor to the rate stabilization fund. So it's sitting there, and it's not been touched. Well, we're ready to touch it because it needs to be deployed and put to its use. So that fund has $7.4 million sitting in it. I'd like to ask you to consider transferring $3.55 million back to the general fund to fund the following projects. $1.4 million will go to transportation and stormwater projects. $600,000 is going to go to our citywide computer refresh. And when I prepared the budget and presented the budget to you, at that point in time, I really thought that we were going to be able to lease those computers from Dell. Upon review of the contract, there were some onerous, I think it was indemnity provisions. It had to do with us providing additional insurance on these computers outside of our normal requirements. And in consultation with City Attorney's Office, it felt like, and Mr. McNichol, it felt like it would be serve us better to just go ahead and pay cash for them. So that's what I'm recommending. I already had $200,000 in the budget for the computers. The total project is $800,000, so I'm asking for $600,000 with those computers. $550,000 to fund the raises in the general in the general fund. And that will get us through the first paycheck in December the 12th, through the payroll ending June 30. And then we'll just incorporate those adjusted salaries into our budgeting process as we move forward. And then lastly, Mr. McNichol and I would like to ask for $1 million transfer to the airport. And with the advent of commercial air service, we have had enormous projects needing to be funded. And very thankfully, FAA is walking our way and stepping up. They have us programmed out for about 5 years, which does include a new terminal if we get to that point, and that's the direction we decide to go. But in funding those, remember that is a 10% match on the city. And so while $13 million sounds very, very exciting for a new terminal, 10% of that is $1.3 million. And that's hard for the general fund to come up with and to provide to the airport. So that's why we decided that we would bring that to your attention and ask for a set aside for these grant matches as these projects are coming up. And then I gave you that would leave us a balance there in that little set-aside fund of about $3.9 million. And again, that could be deployed later on at your direction.
Yeah, if I may, for a minute here, we have to look at the practicality of what we can get done in the rest of this fiscal year. And so long meetings with Monty, long meetings with Stormwater. I mean, it's tempting to say, well, let's just transfer the whole amount, but we would then be carrying forward stuff at the end of this next fiscal year. So that will be available for deployment next year, along with whatever transfer that we have from SUA.
And then finally, again, the ask of direction from you to staff to proceed with a evaluation of all the reserves and trying to develop that policy hand in hand with the rate studies as they're happening, and what's defendable, what's logical, what is needed in a reserve for these different utilities.
Trustees, questions or comments at this point?
Just for clarification, item A, 1.4 million to transportation and stormwater projects are the projects that Monty described.
Yes, ma'am. So there, I did have a handout in your packet that kind of summarized, because as Mr. McNichol pointed out, I had numbers flying everywhere, and so it got a little hard to keep up with them. Oh, what did I do with that?
The one with the A's and B's?
Yes, that's it. So hopefully that kind of recaps for you where the money's coming from, what projects it's going to fund, and what the balances will be in those accounts after we move that money around.
Well, I did have a question about that.
Okay.
Because you showed $6 million total, 2.8 from the general, 1.4 from utilities, 1.8 from waste management.
Mm-hmm.
And then the expenses, the total reallotments, 8.7. I'm confused about those numbers.
Well,
Do those add, those like,
well, and remember, 2.8 of that's already sitting over in the general fund, so you're not going to move that around.
okay. I'm still not sure what. Well, I mean, we're spending 550 on the general employee salary increase, 600 on the computers, $1 million on the airport reserve. And that's coming out of that 6 million? No.
No, it's in addition to. So your 6 million's
Okay.
comprised of the 2.8, the 1.4, and the 1.
6 million is the total that's being transferred to the general fund. This other stuff's,
The total of the.
It's the total that's going to
So all of the
transportation and
transfer.
stormwater
Oh, okay,
projects. And
okay.
it's made up of 3 components, 2 coming out of SUA, 1 coming out of the general fund.
I'm going to get there.
Already in the.
I'm sorry,
see it.
I tried to
No, no.
be more clear.
There's 2 sums. I gotcha. I'm glad you guys can read spreadsheets better than I can. Okay. Trustees, further questions?
I just have one kind of just curiosity question. The money that's in this SUA administratively designated reserve, what does that money do when it's sitting there? Is it just sitting in an account?
It's invested.
Okay.
So it's what I call idle cash. And Mr. McNichol had pointed out to you that we have $15 million of SUA idle cash invested in a interest-bearing account at Equity Bank. And then we have $5 million of general fund idle cash invested at the same bank. And they're earning, we're actually exceeding 100 basis points these days, so that's really
Wow.
good. I know, and the Fed increased the rates last Wednesday, so we're hopeful. But we're trying to be really good stewards, and we can be because of the magnitude of the dollars we deal with. You know, when you've only got $10 to invest, that interest is minuscule, but when you have millions of dollars to invest, that interest translates to salaries and to programming costs and supplies and fixed costs. So we're really trying to do the best job we can in a kind of what I consider a laddered environment. So you've got your liquid, I can get to it pretty darn quick. I've got my what I call semi-liquid, it takes a little bit more, and then my Visa card that's frozen in ice that I'm going to have to really want something before I go and get that. But in all of those manners or all of those investments, we're trying to earn the most that we can on those. And remember, again, as government, we have restrictions. I can't go out and invest in Canadian unit trusts or anything like that. Nothing risky. It's got to be pretty solid. So that's a really good question, though.
One other thing that I would like to point out is that we have taken into account what we currently think, without taking a really long look at it, is a reasonable reserve for both the SUA right now today and general fund. And we believe we also have that right now. So by making all of these transfers that we're suggesting to you, we're not putting there is plenty of reserve fund that if we had a disaster tomorrow, we could tap those funds.
Right.
And if all of this tonight seems like a big puzzle, I really feel sorry for our CFO, deputy city manager, when we started on this, because I kept asking, why was this here? Why is it here? Again, that GFOA and GASB accounting will drive you crazy.
Well, we also just talked about how we don't know where our storm lines are in the city, where they're buried. So it's not a completely unfathomable to think that we're not exactly sure which pot of which money goes where and what it's supposed to be used for. So it's
Well, and again, I would
somewhat
point out,
understandable, although we need to fix it.
And we do.
I would also point out that I don't think that anybody has ever, at least to our knowledge, drawn a line and said, if we close this business today, where would we be? And that's one of the reasons we were able to come to this conclusion, because of the way it is incredible the way this money moves around.
Okay. Trustees, further questions or comments or motions? I think we could probably, if someone wanted to make a motion on all of these recommendations at once, that would be entertained.
Lovely.
Motion to approve staff recommendations 1 through 6.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve staff recommendations. Please vote. So with a vote of 5-0, staff recommendations are approved. I think that finishes off the SUA agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting. Please vote. We have a vote of 5-0. The Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting is adjourned. I will now reconvene the Stillwater City Council meeting at item 8. where we still have a few things to deal with on item 8. Item 8A. Counselors, comments, questions, motions at this point for general orders at the city council meeting? Does anybody know where we are?
Yeah.
Transportation.
I don't even know what building I'm in.
We have
But we
a,
still have the two
yes,
raises.
we have the 2 issues of raises, and yes, that's from the first item, from 18-112.
Go ahead. Motion, did I have to do one at a time?
No?
Motion to approve the 4% raises for full-time staff and part-time.
I will counsel that motion, or second that motion. Counselor.
We have a motion and a second to approve staff recommendations on item 2 and 3, 4% salary increases for both full-time and part-time employees. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, those items are approved. Okay, on report CC 18-113, the transportation report, there are a staff recommendation to fund recommended projects at estimated cost of $6.22 million. Do we want to make recommendations at this, or does anyone have a motion? I'm sorry.
Come back, so
As
is
a-
this one where we can decide
Mhm.
if we maybe want it to come back as a resolution?
As a resolution?
We certainly can do that.
So,
To make a motion to do that?
You can make a motion to accept staff recommendations, or make a motion to direct staff to come back at the next meeting with a proposed resolution. on how to
Or you can
Make a-
take no action on the item.
do anything.
If I had a long microphone.
I can take this one now.
Comments or thoughts?
so
If you take the second option, then they can come back and give you the better details and formulate it better.
So I would like to make a motion that staff comes back to us with a resolution for the items in the transportation capital projects
Okay.
item. Is that sufficient?
As outlined in alternative 1.
As outlined? Yes,
Yep.
as outlined in alternative 1.
So I'm going to take that as a motion to direct staff to prepare resolutions that would implement the staff recommendations on report 18-113.
I think that's right.
Okay, so we have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that motion is approved. Okay, item report CC-18-114, which is the stormwater report, which includes, oh man, wrong piece of paper. I had it here. Yes. I got it 2 places now. This one included a staff recommendation to approve alternative 1 to fund the first phase of the stormwater drainage plan, master drainage plan, to authorize staff to proceed with a stopgap plan for the Orchard Road project, and to allocate $120,000 from the stormwater fee fund for that project, correct? The Orchard Street project? So do we want a motion either on resolutions or a motion to approve this item, or other options?
I think I'd like a resolution, just the same as the other one, just to have that consistent.
so we can follow easier where this thing's going.
Track it.
Was that a motion?
Motion.
Yeah, oh. So second.
Okay, so we have a motion to direct staff to prepare resolutions which would adopt the recommendation from alternative 1 in the report 18-114.
Yes.
Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that item is approved. I think that's it.
Mayor, can I ask
Yes,
one
ma'am.
for clarification? When you all approved the raises, and maybe Liz can tell us, did you stipulate that the union employees were excluded?
I think I just said full-time and part-time. I didn't specify union.
And so I'm wondering if we maybe need to come back and can we come back and redo that? And or do we need to?
Well, I think what we said was as recommended in items 2 and 3, which does say
Yeah,
excludes union
staff's
employees.
recommendation.
So that's what we were,
Just wanted to be clear.
sure.
Yep.
You're good with that, city attorney? Okay, I think that covers all of the issues we covered in item 8. Does anyone feel like we need to talk about anything else from item 8? You sure?
Just one quick point.
Yes?
We did not talk a lot about water. Just to give you completely full disclosure, we took a look at that, and because of Water 2040, those funds are being spent on current capital projects, and there is no reserve there to call upon. And again, point out to the public, only waste management and electric utility can transfer to the general fund.
Okay, thank you. All right, that takes us to item 9, reports from officers and boards. Mr. McGrath.
There's one announcement from my office, but I'll defer to the city manager. He would like to make it.
All right, well, we'll move to item B and ask the city manager about the exciting announcement from the city attorney's office.
Well, the exciting announcement from the city attorney's office is that John and Sarah Dorman are grandparents. They had a delivery this morning about 11 o'clock of Bennett Howard Dorman, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, and everybody's well.
Good, excellent. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
I also have
What else you got?
one item of business.
Sure.
And it kind of goes along with the proclamation that you read tonight and the fact that our local utility is city-owned. And this is pretty distressing. Both state and federal both the state of Oklahoma and the Federal Communications Commission have preempted local government's ability to control their citizens-owned rights-of-way. This preemption gives for-profit companies access to publicly owned property and removes the local government's ability to negotiate contracts for that use. In addition to limiting fees, there are shot clocks that limit the time period for an application approval, and local governments cannot regulate the aesthetics of the equipment installed on our citizen-owned poles. This is all in place to allow cell companies to install small cell sites on utility poles. As a result, there could be many antenna devices placed on our poles throughout the community.
I think we should bury our utilities.
Pardon?
We should bury our utilities.
Then
They
they'll
can
just
go
put
down.
boxes up on the right-of-way.
And
They get
exactly.
access to the right-of-way.
And frankly, if they put in we can't require them to put in a vault if they put some ugly box on the ground in our right of way. So this is something that will probably the city attorney and the city manager will be coming back to you at some point and saying we need to fight. This is an unlawful taking.
Yeah, I mean.
It is just flat a unlawful taking of citizens' property, and I don't know if there's a way. We don't want to deprive our citizens of 5G and the next greatest thing in Wi-Fi, and if there's a way to allow them to go ahead and install those things while preserving our rights to protest, I think we need to do it. It would be no different than me coming to any one of you and saying, I'm going to put this ugly thing right smack in the middle of your yard. And not only am I going to do it, I'm going to make money off of it, and you can't say a word.
Yeah, and it's not just about it being ugly, right? It's about the fact that they're utilizing the public infrastructure that our public takes care of, that we pay for, that we in many cases bought from somebody and paid for to obtain it. It is absolutely a matter of the state and local, or the state and federal government saying, we know better than you guys know about what to do with your city and what your city-owned resources, how they should be used, and it's a real problem. But we'll do what we can.
Thank you.
Counselors, Counselor Zanotti.
Yes, well, it is October 1, so it's time to start thinking about Halloween. So the city is now accepting applications for businesses or organizations interested in hosting a trick-or-treat booth at the Halloween Festival on Tuesday, October 30th. Applications are available on the city's website and are due by Friday, October 12th. So that's for Tuesday, October 30th, the Halloween Festival. But also like to remind you that neighborhood trick-or-treating is always on the night of October 31st in Stillwater.
Which is a Wednesday?
It is a Wednesday this year.
Wednesday. Thank you. Vice Mayor?
I have a kind of exciting announcement. We've talked a lot about helping people talk to us, and this is a new way. We want to encourage you to check out the new Speak Up Stillwater program on the city's website. Speak Up Stillwater is a web platform for you to share your thoughts, questions, and ideas about issues presented to City Council. The first topic is on the community broadband utility feasibility study. We discussed that at our last meeting. And you can also suggest other topics for discussion. Speak Up Stillwater on the city website.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
It's actually really cool.
It is.
Been on it.
Yeah.
But it also not only gives you an opportunity to make remarks, but it also gives you a little bit of background information if you're interested in kind of reading up and getting knowledgeable on the topic and kind of understanding where we're at and some facts and kind of questions that people might have kind of off the top. I really enjoyed that.
Helps the
Yep,
counselors
it was.
too.
It was really easy to navigate.
Excellent. Counselor Wedlake.
So the city of Stillwater collected $2.2 million, that's specifically $2,279,647 in sales tax from July 2018 that were apportioned to the city in September. These collections fall behind projections for September by 8.12%. And if you want more information on this, you can read the full report on the city's website.
Not great news.
Not the best news, but
We were up 8% last month, weren't we?
We were
Something like that.
so we're
7 points.
Can't get
even
ahead.
for the last 2 months. That's how I look at it.
Counselor Jaloski. Lean forward. Speaking to
We'll
the
try to find you a new mic.
I'm totally kidding. We'd like to challenge you to imagine a day without water next Wednesday, October 10th. This is a nationwide day of education and advocacy about the value of water. Water keeps our communities healthy, our cities running, and our economies growing. And for more information on this day, you can visit thevalueofwater.org.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't have an announcement to read, but I do want to say thank you to the staff tonight. A culmination of a lot of hard work over the last few months for you all going through budgets and the history of finances in the city. We really appreciate the work that you've done in this matter. I think all of us, we've kind of heard stuff we don't love to hear about our city, which is we haven't done a great job in the past always of documentation, of planning, of making sure everybody knows where everything is buried, making sure we know, all of the details we need to know. We also haven't done a great job of investing in our infrastructure in the city over the last 30 or 40 years. I am very happy that this council and the staff we have now are committed to fixing those problems. They're committed to fixing the internal management issues, but also committed to fixing the investment problem and saying we're going to spend the money we need to spend to make our streets drain properly and to give our people the ability to get where they need to go no matter how they travel. So thank you, staff and council, for those commitments. All right, that takes us to the end. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion and a second to adjourn. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, we now adjourned.
First, tell you guys thanks for